We'll turn that on. Okay. And without further ado, we'll turn it over to Nejma and her team to talk about this year's Pulse survey and where we are as a School of Social Work community.
Thank you. Thank you, Samantha. We are going to try to be quick today because we realize that just a whole bunch of stats and data could be a bit much. But we are providing an update on DEI and really just reviewing the results of the Pulse survey. We're not getting too much into interpreting or data analysis, a little bit, but just really just giving you what the survey results showed. So today joining me will be our DEI data intern, Erica Mullet, and we will be co-presenting together. So without any further ado, Erica is going to kind of start us off to give us some framing around the actual survey, including the questions, the time it took, etc. And then we'll kind of be tag teaming, going back and forth. So Erica will be sharing her screen.
Thank you for the introduction, Nejma. So I'll just go ahead and get us started. So today we're looking at this Pulse survey data and what that looks like. So just some background info on our Pulse survey. It was a 25-question survey administered on November 29th to December 20th of last semester. We looked at the categories of experiencing microaggressions, transitioning back to in-person learning and work, support received, and perceptions of inclusion and belonging, and the average completion time was about 5 to 7 minutes. So just a breakdown of the respondents, we had 46 students, 29 staff members, 19% faculty members. We also had small numbers with alumni and those who did not want to identify themselves. And here we have our respondents broken down by race. So majority of our respondents identified as white, about 54.6%. And we had those who identified as being of color reporting at 34%. And how this compares to last year. So our overall responses were lower from our survey done last year, which was, we had 306 respondents. This year we had 294. We added a new question on transitioning back to in-person learning. And we also noticed that we got more of a response from students and less a response from faculty and staff. So I will give this to Nejma.
Yeah. So a couple things we wanted to highlight in terms of overall our respondents who identified as having a disability. And the question was asking whether someone had a disability that impacts their learning and or working. So this year we had 24.6% say yes. And the reason that that was notable was that last year we had 14% answering yes to this same question. And so we see that as a good thing that, you know, something about our culture is allowing people to identify more as having a disability. And so I think that is a move, at least from our perspective, in a good direction. It also coincides with what we see as a higher percentage rate of student respondents as well. So I think to keep that in mind. Something else we also captured that we wanted to make note of, we did not ask this last year, but we thought it was important given that we do have our first gen program to ask about those that identify as first gen. And we didn't limit this question only to students. It was sort of to everyone. And so we had 25%, and this includes students, staff, and faculty that identify as first gen. 74.2 that said no, and then 0.8 that prefer not to answer. So that is I think something notable as we think about what we're doing and what our Office of Student Affairs and Services doing around first gen students, but also there were a good amount of faculty and staff that did identify as first gen. So that is something that could be for further conversation as well. Next slide. So we're gonna transition into talking about some of the key categories we mentioned. And the first one is looking at transitioning into in-person learning and working. Am I doing this one? Okay. So the respondents were asked to respond to this prompt, which is, I've been afforded a reasonable amount of flexibility during the transition to back in-person work and or learning. So overall, we had 73% of our respondents that strongly agreed or agreed. So that is a pretty high number of folks saying that they feel as though there's been a reasonable amount of flexibility. When we break that down by race, and when we talk about BIPOC, we're talking about folks that identified as Black and or African American, those that identified as Latinx, those identify as other marginalized racial groups, multiracial as well. Between BIPOC and white, I think it's pretty comparable. We have 71% saying strongly agree or agree versus respondents who identified as white as 76%. When it comes to roles, though, we do see a significant difference in terms of folks feeling whether they've been afforded a reasonable amount of flexibility. So our students are saying 61% either strongly agree or agree. Faculty, we have a really high number, which is 90%. And then staff, 84% either strongly agree or agreeing. And this could be due to a number of reasons. We know that for the most part, and this is not always, our faculty may have a little bit more maybe agency around their schedules or afforded more flexibility versus our students and maybe our staff a little bit. Next slide. So this is about transitioning back to in-person work or learning, but it's around whether or not it's equitable and inclusive. So we looked at that different than we did flexibility. So overall, we had less than 50% of respondents agreeing or strongly agreeing that the transition back to in-person work has been equitable and or inclusive. And the way that we define equitable and inclusive is what we use on our website, and I could provide those definitions later. So that is something for us to kind of explore and think about that number. When we break it down by race, BIPOC versus white, it's pretty, I would say, comparable, the same response. Once we start getting into roles, students versus faculty versus staff, we see that students, only 32% strongly agreed or agreed that the transition to back in-person work and or learning has been equitable or inclusive. For faculty, that number was 42%, and for staff, they had the highest amount, which was 54%. So while across race, we don't see any significant differences, I think across role, in terms of students, faculty, and staff, we do see significant differences in terms of how folks are feeling, whether or not the process of transitioning back to in-person and or learning has been equitable and or inclusive. Next slide. So now Erica is going to take us through what different respondents identified as the top 3 pressing DEI concerns. And we're going to do that overall, then broken down by role, race, and ability status. Erica?
Thank you, Nejma. So this was a question that we did not have on our 2020 survey. So this was added to our newest survey. So overall, our respondents were looking for an inclusive program, which would look at how SSW incorporates learning that promotes inclusion and more learning of DEI issues. Second one is curriculum and program flexibility. And our third is telework and work from home policy. It varies slightly across the different categories we have. For students, it's very similar to how faculty and staff members responded. But what's different with students is that one of their pressing concerns was tuition. Whereas when we look at faculty and staff members, they're more concerned about the telework policy and also an inclusive program.
So just to add some context, there were a number of different things presented. I think we had about 8 or 10. So we're just giving you all the top 3 that folks identified overall, and then you can see broken down. It's pretty much the same top 3, kind of like moved around depending on what the role is, but those sort of the inclusive program, meaning wanting more DEI, either in curriculum or in work practices, things like that. And I wanted to make sure I distinguish between what we meant by inclusive program versus curriculum. So the inclusive program is like, what does our content look like as far as curriculum? How many courses do we have that specifically focus on DEI? Readings, things like that, versus curriculum program flexibility has to do with some of the conversations we've been talking about, hybrid program, online, those kinds of things. And then, well, the telework and work from home policy. So as you can see, those 3 kind of flip-flopped between the students, faculty, and staff, but for the most part, tended to remain the top 3 in different orders, with the exception of tuition, as Erica just explained. So I think now we're going to talk about how that differed with race and then ability status. Erica is.
So that it didn't really vary between BIPOC and white. I mean, as you can see, it's the exact same list. But looking at ability status, those who identified as having a disability, one of their first concerns was the curriculum and program flexibility. Then it also went into having an inclusive program and tuition. And we also looked at those who identified that they do not have a disability, and their concerns were inclusive programming, the curriculum and the program flexibility, and the telework policies. So here we're discussing witnessing and experiencing microaggressions, and we have this broken down by race, role at SSW, sexual orientation, and ability status. So within the last calendar year, those who identified as BIPOC reported that 44% have witnessed a microaggression, compared to last year where 60% reported witnessing microaggressions at SSW. And when we look at how people who identified as white and how they responded, 42.2% of them reported, yes, they have witnessed microaggressions. And in 2020, they also reported that 56 witnessed microaggressions.
So what is interesting about this particular slide is you can see when it comes to folks that identify as BIPOC, those that witness actually went down from last year. And well, they went down both versus BIPOC versus white. But what I thought was interesting about this particular slide was the wide gap between the 60% and the 44.8% from this year to last year in terms of witnessing. So I think there are a number of different theories that we could think about in terms of why that is. It could be that when we did the first survey, some part of the year also included us being in person, because that was like 2020, so the very early part of that, so that could account for that, versus last year where we were mostly virtual. So maybe the witnessing, right, like that, there was less opportunities to see that. We don't know. We're still kind of trying to think through some of those areas and possibilities. But that is a notable stat to think about as well.
So then we also compared experiencing microaggressions directed towards the respondent themselves. So those who identified as BIPOC, 40.2% responded that they have experienced a microaggression at SSW this year, compared to 2020 survey, 52% reported that they experienced microaggressions. We also see that 48.3% reported that they have not witnessed any or have not experienced any microaggressions, and 44% of them last year reported that they did not experience that. So just a very small difference there. And if we're looking at those who identify as white, 24.5% have reported that they have experienced a microaggression, whereas compared to last year, only 20% reported that they experienced microaggressions. Something that's notable with this data particularly is looking at the white respondents who reported no. There is a difference from that in last year. Last year, 79% reported that they did not experience microaggressions.
So as you all can see, the number of respondents who identified as white and reporting that they witnessed microaggression went up. And one of the things that we did notice, and it wasn't a lot, but there were a few at least in the qualitative data where folks sort of commented that we were paying a lot of attention to race, and that as a white person, they were feeling excluded, and some folks wanting to know why we had a white accountability affinity group and things of that nature. So we did sort of see some of those comments in the results, in the qualitative and those kinds of comments. And so that could be related to some of what we're seeing or not, but that is just something to note. And we saw something similar for folks who, we haven't gotten to that yet, but we saw something similar. A couple of people, and not a lot, but a couple of people asking about affinity group for people who identify as being straight, and questioning why did we have one for LGBTQ folks. So some of those dynamics, again, not a lot, but just something to keep in mind that we did note on the survey results as well. Next slide. So if you look at the witnessing microaggression broken down as role, it is pretty much more or less the same. We saw the highest number in students with 45% saying yes, they've witnessed a microaggression, and then staff with the lowest 38.4% saying yes, they've witnessed a microaggression. Next slide. And then when it comes to experiencing a microaggression, we think it's pretty much the same as witnessing as well, with staff being the lowest in terms of saying yes, they've experienced a microaggression at 24%, and then students being the highest at 32.1%, and faculty is about the same as well. Next slide. So we also broke down witnessing and experiencing microaggression across sexual orientation. And in terms of witnessing, those who identified as being heterosexual or straight, 36% said yes, they've witnessed a microaggression versus 56% of folks who identify as LGBTQ+. That is about a 20% difference. So that is significant. And also what we noted similar results last year. Last year's data, we had 60% report that they did witness a microaggression. So we definitely continue to see high percentage of folks that identify as LGBTQ both witnessing and experiencing microaggression. If you look at the numbers, particularly for experiencing this year and last year, it is the same. So that has not shifted for folks that identified as LGBTQ. So if you look at the LGBTQ column and you see experiencing, and then you look at yes, it says 44%, and then last year we were at the same. And if you compare this to folks who don't identify as being LGBTQ+, that's 24%, so that's 20% less. So this is definitely an area I think we have to continue to do some work around, have ongoing conversations, because we are doing some things, but we have not seen, I think, some of the movement that we're hoping for in terms of both witnessing and experiencing. Next slide. So we also broke witnessing and experiencing microaggressions down according to ability status. So for folks who do not report having a disability, the percentage of those who witnessed a microaggression was 37% versus those who do report having a disability, those who witnessed was 56%. Again, that's another huge gap. But keep in mind, this is witnessing. But even when we look at experiencing microaggressions themselves, those who report that they do not have a disability, 26% said yes, they've experienced a microaggression versus 45% who said yes, that they've experienced a microaggression. It is important to note that this is down from last year. Last year, folks that identified as having a disability, 52% reported that they had experienced a microaggression. This year, we're looking at 45%. So that is something to note as well. Should we keep going? Yes? Okay.
That's fine with me.
All right.
Yeah, Najma, this is Judy. Can I ask a question really,
Yes.
or you want me to wait?
No. That's why I paused.
Go back one slide to the disability. I've been trying to understand the other ways you've been presenting this, of people who aren't identifying with a particular group you're looking at, right? So how are they asked about whether they experience a microaggression? Are they saying, so the 26% who said they experienced a microaggression, is that based on the fact that they're able and they have no disability?
So we asked, no, so we asked sort of the general question about experience, and then the way that our system is, we have filters that allow us to then disaggregate the data according to different identities. So we can then look at those that were BIPOC versus white, those that said that they had a disability or not, but we're not asking a question specific to the ability status or disability. It's just that when we break it down, we're able to see the data. And we do have, I think here, some of our folks from the Institute who worked with us on this, who could explain that further, but that was what we did.
So if somebody says yes in this category, it could be a microaggression based on some other membership of some other group, that's what this data is collecting. Is that what you're telling me? Or I'm just trying to understand a little bit better.
Say that one more time, I'm sorry.
So I said, so somebody, this yes, 26% yes, experiencing a microaggression, who do not report having a disability, they experience some other microaggression based on some other category or group that they belong to.
Yeah, so
Okay.
because we don't ask the question specific to have you experienced a microaggression, like a racial microaggression or aggression or microaggression because of your ability status or microaggression. What we do is
Okay.
we ask the general question and then we look at the data specifically in the same way that we don't ask, have you experienced a microaggression because of your role as a student or a faculty as a staff? We ask
Okay.
the question and then we look at it in that way.
Okay.
Mhm.
Sorry. And then one quick other question, and this is more for the process of how you did this. You used the word significant differences. Did you all run any t-tests or any analysis to see if there's significant differences between groups, between years?
I don't know why I can't hear you, Judy. Could you ask that here?
Hold on. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. So the question is, use the word significant. Did anybody run analyses to look at significant differences between groups like these two groups you're presenting, or significant differences between years, to actually look at test of significance, like a t-test, to see if?
I'm not sure. No, I don't think we did that. But yeah, we didn't run those tests to examine significance. I think I'm just using my own own in language in that, but we could.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Then maybe you could, because then that will help as you think about what's significantly different between years, between groups, between varied categories.
Yeah, that is definitely something that we could do moving forward.
All right, then sorry to interrupt you, Flo.
No, it's okay. And thank you for bringing that up. When I use the word significant, I want to say that I'm not necessarily saying statistically significant. I'm just saying that it is significant because it is something that is happening. So thank you, Judy, for clarifying that.
Okay, thank you. And thanks, Aaron. I see in your chat
I thought I saw a hand, but I'm not sure. So if somebody wants to unmute, okay. I don't know who is that, but please go ahead.
It's Dana. I'm sorry.
Oh, hey, Dana. Yes, it's fine. Go ahead.
This has been amazing, and this might be a future question for research. But one of the things that I'm wondering is, these microaggressions, are they experienced solely at the school social work? Because something that might be interesting to explore is in your field placement. Is there a difference in experiencing microaggressions at your agency that you intern at versus the school? And not only asking students, but also asking field instructors and field liaisons. Because I have a feeling that some of the microaggressions that people are reporting may not be from classes, lectures, or from professors, but might actually be in their agency. And I can tell you personally that I answered one of the yes, I was a student with microaggression at a field placement previously, but could not advocate for myself because there's a lot of power dynamics and stigma involved with advocating for it versus wanting to graduate and passing the assignment.
Definitely, Dana, and we definitely do agree and think that what we're seeing, particularly with our students, is probably a lot of what might be going on in field placements as well. Because when we talk about what our next steps are, that's definitely one of the areas that we want to be looking at it. So it is definitely a great point. And I think whether it is happening particularly in the school or in field placement, we still do see it as a responsibility of ours to figure out how we're going to address this collectively. So thank you for bringing that point. Okay, we can keep going. All right, so Erica, I think this is you.
So this question asked, I can freely express my opinions and concerns about DEI without fear of reprisal from SSW. Wait a second. So our overall responses to this question, we had 37 respondents answer strongly agree, 120 answer agree, 75 neither agree nor disagree. We had 31 with disagree and 12 with strongly disagree. And we also break that down by race and role. So for those who identify as being BIPOC, 41.7% of them agreed that they feel that they can freely express their opinions and concerns. Compared to last year, 37% reported that they agree or strongly disagree that they can freely express themselves. So not much of a difference among those statistics. If we're looking at those who identify as white, 16.9% strongly agree, 45.5% agree. With the comparison to last year, we had 58% strongly agreeing or agreeing to the fact that they can express their opinions and concerns in SSW. And this looks at how the students, faculty, and staff members feel that they can express their opinions and concerns. Overall, most of the data is leaning towards strongly agree or agree to expressing opinions at SSW.
So if we can stay on this side for a bit just to go through, because it could be kind of hard to know which one is what. So for our student, which is the circle in the up left-hand corner, we had so 68% agree or strongly agree that they can freely express their opinions and concerns about DEI. With faculty, we had 47% either agree or strongly agree that they can freely express. And then for staff, we had 42.6% agree and then 9.9% strongly agree. Just so you all can see, because I know this side can be a little bit confusing. Next slide, please. So this question asks, do you feel like you've been excluded or treated negatively within SSW or its units during the last calendar year for any of these sort of like identities? So this is different than a question that asks, what are your 3 top DEI concerns? This is about the aspects of your identity that you believe may have, you have felt excluded or treated negatively. So overall, folks identify job classification as the #1 reason where they feel they've been excluded or treated negatively within SSW and its units, followed by race and ethnicity, followed by ability, disability status. When we compare that to 2020, the #1 was race and ethnicity. Number 2 was job classification. And then number 3 was gender identity. So as I mentioned, this question allowed respondents to report the top 3 areas of their identity and may have made them feel excluded within SSW and its units. Next slide. When we break down this same questions by race, we will see that for folks that identified as BIPOC, the top 3, so what I just gave you all was overall. For folks that identify as BIPOC, the top 3, one was race and ethnicity, versus for folks that identify as white, it was job classification. For BIPOC, the number 2 was job classification, versus folks that identify as white was ability or disability status. And then the number 3 reason for BIPOC folks were education level, versus those respondents that identify as white was gender identity. When we compare that to our 2020 responses for BIPOC folks, it essentially remained the same, as well as for folks that identify as white. So there was no movement there in terms of what aspects of your identity have made you feel excluded. Moving on to the next slide. And we just have a couple more and we'll be wrapping up and we can open up for questions. So when it comes to role, as you can see, we have this nice table up here that allows you to see how people ranked according to the role of faculty, staff, and student. So for faculty, aspects of their identity that may have made them feel excluded for faculty, number 1 was job classification, followed by race, ethnicity, followed by gender identity. For staff, it was job classification, race, ethnicity, and then education. And then for students, it was ability status as number 1, race and ethnicity as number 2, and then socioeconomic status as number 3. And then if we look at our 2020 responses, for faculty, it basically remained the same, but just kind of switched the order. Last year for faculty, race and ethnicity was the number 1 reason that faculty identified as feeling excluded. This year, it was job classification. For staff, it remained the same. Last year, it was job classification. This year, it was. And then for students, that shifted. Last year, the number 1 reason students identified as being or feeling excluded was race, ethnicity, and this year it was ability status. We found a socioeconomic status as the number 3 reason for students interested in a point of probably further conversation and something to explore as well. Next slide. So in terms of who is participating in DEI events, overall, we had 52% of respondents say that they do participate, and these events could be trainings, it could be initiatives, it could be affinity groups, and it also does not have to be just DEI events that's put on between the school, the office, or the DEIC, though we certainly, based on some of our comments, we certainly believe that that's where most of our folks were looking at. So we have, in terms of participation, 68% of our students say they participate in DEI events versus 52% of faculty, and then 64% of our staff. And these numbers, I think feels promising to us. At least they're all over 50%. So we have folks participating in various events, and we want to keep that number growing as we continue doing all of the work and initiatives that come through our office, that come through the DEIC and other places as well. Next slide. So understanding the process for reporting DEI concerns. So overall, when asked the questions, do you understand the process of reporting DEI concerns? 52.7% of respondents said yes, and 46.2% said no. So we do have a significant number of folks that do not know or understand. When I have a concern, DEI concern, whether it's a microaggression, whether it's a bias incident or something, what do I do? When we broke that down by role, in terms of the folks that said, yes, I do understand, we only had 32% of students that said, yes, I understand the process for reporting DEI concern. 82% of faculty that said yes, and 64% of staff that said yes. So the difference between percentage, what we're seeing for students that's saying they understand versus, let's say, faculty or staff, again, I'm saying significant because I'm looking at the percentage. I'm not getting into necessarily all the statistics, statistically significant, but it is something that is definitely on our radar and a point for us to think about. How do we ensure that students know what they have to do and where they have to go should an issue arise, either in field or in the classroom or somewhere else. So that's definitely something that we're going to be looking at moving forward. Next slide. So Erica will do these last couple of slides.
Thank you. So this slide is just going over some of the qualitative comments that we received along with the question, what would people like to see implemented with SSW? Here's a summary of some of the points that we received. Providing students with an overview of the kinds of disability accommodations they could request would be helpful. Student input on curriculum and proposed curriculum changes. More trainings offered and open to anyone, including leadership. More chances to engage in DEI events that are available not during class or field times. And clear guidelines for reporting issues and the resources that are available.
And I would say that we got a lot of different things in terms of what people like to see. We pulled out the ones that we saw sort of as recurring themes. For the more chances to engage in DEI events, I do want to note that this was not just specific to students. I know we put during class central fields, but was also comments around, work day and people getting the time to be able to do that. The fact that there were lots of meetings happening that sometimes kind of clashed and things like that. And then the guidelines for reporting issues, I think, was across the board with students, faculty, and staff. So definitely, again, I saw Dean Lenning put in the comments the need to continue to develop ways to communicate. And I think that is true because we developed a DEI reporting guideline that we distributed that was also on the website, but it is clear that there are still ways that we need to think about how do we get this information, particularly to our students. So there's definitely a disconnect there that we will continue to look at. And of course, if people have ideas, feedback, we're all in this together working collaboratively. So, we will continue to work on this and think through ways to bolster our communication. And our communication team, I know, is also working really hard on that aspect as well. Next slide. And Erica, I think you're also doing this.
So we also asked a question of what is working well for our program, and this was across the board for all respondents. Some of the key notes that we took from our responses were having spaces for discussion of social issues impacting people of race, ethnicity, or other marginalized groups. Supervisors that support growth and learning around racial equity and white supremacy. And then this can apply to not just students and their field supervisors, but also with faculty and staff members within the school. We also received notes on emails and newsletters from the DEI office getting sent out regularly. Conversations about DEI in the school among the leadership and ability to work from home.
So in terms of some of the immediate next steps, one of the things that's clear to us that came from here, and as you all can see, is making sure that folks have information in terms of what to do when they have a DEI concern. So it's not enough just to perhaps post something on our website. So we were thinking about whether we need to do a collaborative training with our Office of Accountability and Compliance for the school so that people can attend and be there and see and ask questions, because this is really important, that concerns are reported through the right channel so that it can be appropriately addressed. The second piece was collaborating with our Office of Field Education around training and support for our field instruction and our field placements, as we talked about the question around microaggressions. And I think one of our students brought up that perhaps what we're seeing is microaggressions that could be taken in place in field as well. So that is something that we're looking at. The MPC, which we know is already happening, continuing to work on creating more flexible options. More opportunities for DEI coaching beginning with leadership. We did see a number of the qualitative of the comments talk about, you know, the sort of like top from the top to the bottom. So the leadership should also be engaging in this. And so there are a number of deans that will be starting equity based coaching in the next couple of months. So I think that is great and a step in the right direction. Definitely across the board accessibility training for faculty and staff. Also, the need to have one of the things that we were talking about and working on was having equity accessibility audit, and it is also clear from what we're seeing that that is something that definitely needs to happen. We hopefully will get that done soon in the upcoming months as well. Providing students with an overview of the kind of accommodations they can request. Definitely more DEI events held to accommodate students as well as work schedules. And then finally, there was just a lot around sort of like job role, job classification as we saw. And so thinking about ways that we could provide support and coaching, and maybe it's not us, but figuring out how that could happen for those that are seeking promotions and more equitable pay and are having issues around specifically their job classification. So what we're going to do is develop a more in-depth report that we will post on our website in the upcoming weeks. We wanted to make sure that at least you all have the information. We also can look we will also look at significance tests. The researchers that are involved in it are telling me that that's not a heavy lift, so we'll make sure that we'll get that done. I also just want to note as we're wrapping up, you know, I am not a researcher. I certainly, sorry for the screaming in the background. I am not a researcher. I certainly collaborated and worked with researchers from the Institute to do this, but I do want to say that for me and our office, and I think for the DEIC, and I don't want to speak for you all, so you all could chime in, you know, regardless of what we see in terms of significance tests, we we have work that we need to do, and we have work that, based on just what we're seeing with all those tests, that feel significant and feel like there are things that we need to continue doing and continue building up to ensure that we continue being equitable and working towards justice and inclusion. But I know the DEIC is here. So Samantha and Stephanie, I don't want to speak for you all, but I think that is very much the perspective of the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. So with that, I am going to say thank you to the team that worked on this, and that is Jill Farrell, Brooke Curley, Erin Bettinger, Julia, and Erica. Thank you all so much. And any questions, comments, concerns, feedback that we have, we definitely welcome it. Any ideas for moving forward, any help, anything like that, all of that is welcome. So thank you for your time. And I am going to mute myself. We're going to stop sharing and we'll take any questions, comments that you all have. Samantha, were you going to say something? I'm sorry. I feel like I might have cut you off.
No, just that, I mean, I think I can speak, I hope, Steph, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think I can speak on behalf of us as a DEIC that we wholeheartedly agree that, you know, the statistics, certainly I know, especially in an academic institution, are important. And when we're talking about creating a culture of inclusion and sense of belonging, every person and every response contributes to that culture. And so thank you so much for sharing these insights and being willing to kind of let us share with them together as a community, because I think that as informing the work of the DEIC, it's just exceptionally meaningful that we have this this pulse that people might not feel comfortable sharing in other ways. And it looks like maybe there's some questions. I know, Paul, I see your hand up.
Hi, thanks. Just a request, if I could. Can we collect data on age? I realize that's potentially identifiable, but in 10-year bins or something like that, I think it might be really informative in terms of. I just think about some of even the concepts used in the discussion, like microaggressions. I think depending on the there's I think a lot of really interesting generational differences here about how people understand the school, and I think could be interesting if people are willing to share that information.
Absolutely. Yep. Thank you for that. That's a really good point. And someone just put that in. Yeah. Yes. That's an easy yes. Does anybody else have any questions, comments, concerns, feedback? You know, we are definitely, this was definitely not a perfect process. So we are welcoming any and all thoughts and help moving forward too.
Yeah, this is hi. So I might encourage us to really think about asking these questions, either related intersectionally to identity or specific to an identity, because essentially we're asking if someone's experienced a microaggression, then we're sort of saying like, oh, this percentage of Black people or persons living with disabilities, but we don't actually know why they experience a microaggression. So it's hard to say where we then need to actually focus our efforts if we don't know how or why they experience the microaggression. So I just think, you know, as we're thinking about the utility, being able to actually relate things back to specific identities or multiple identities is just really informative. So it's just, I think Judy was alluding to, Dean Postmus was alluding to this earlier in her comments, but I just think we might really consider doing that.
Sorry, I could not unmute. Yes. Thank you very much. Yes. So I think, you know, this is a continuous improvement process. So as we are getting your thoughts and input and feedback, definitely. And I know we have, I think Dr. Betzinger is here on the call. I can't see him, but yes. So taking note of that moving forward, most definitely.
Can I piggyback on Darren's comment?
I don't know who
This is Corey.
Oh.
Hi, Nishma.
Hey,
Hi.
Corey. I can't see you, but yes. Hey.
I know the squares are very tiny. I did raise my hand, but I thought, okay. So thank you for doing this. I think it's really helpful. And I had two thoughts. One is piggybacking on what Darren said. Like, I think if we start getting these little, like the squares, if we're doing, it could get super tiny, kind of like, as we're, so not taking away from thinking about people's intersectional identities. I think that's important, but it might be hard, even in terms of statistically, but I, of course, as the qualitative researcher, in the same vein that Darren was thinking about, like, it really matters kind of what these look like, how they're experienced. And I think that Dana and maybe Sarah in the chat had alluded to this too, like where this is happening. So of course I'm going to advocate. And I know that you had some info on the qualitative and even happily to volunteer to help you all if you need, but like, I would want to know more details about it because that will then, like, now we know, I mean, we know that there is still a problem. I don't want to say that now that we know, but so I think it would be really helpful to have like more details about how things unfold so that we could think about, how to address it and in a way that maybe qualitative information, whatever that looks like, would be super helpful. And the other thing is, as a member of the DEIC, like there was so much here. I feel like I want to digest and think about it. And this might be like a note to self for us at the DEIC. I really would like to kind of take it home, look what you have, whatever else you want to share. And then I would love for us as a committee to come back and to continue to talk to you all so that like DEIC and ODI can partner with you. So to say thank you. And it was just so much that I want to keep digesting too.
Thank you, Corey. I think that's a great suggestion, actually. So we'll definitely follow up and make sure we get these presentable looking, clean it up, and then send that out and then have that conversation. Because I think that's the intent and the purpose of doing something like this. So for sure.
Taylor?
Hi, thanks. And thank you, everybody who contributed to this. I was wondering if it's possible, just speaking for student affairs and student services, there was so much rich data about student interactions. If there's going to be work groups, like data is fabulous, but it needs to inform my work. And what I'm seeing here is like, oh, okay, well, maybe there are big gaps that we just haven't seen. And I'd like to work in a team effort, right? About like, wow, how do we best move forward with now this data, right? And are there going to be any, and I hate to say this, any work groups on, and I can just see everybody cringe, right? We've got 4 more weeks and I'm asking for a work group, but even over the summer, because unless we use the data, it just sits there, right? And I want this to be so, informative, at least in the work that I'm doing, that we actually see then huge strides in how we're addressing this. So that's my quick and dirty ask. And forgive me, I'll bring tea or something stronger if I need to at these meetings.
I think that is a great thought and suggestion. And to your point, Taylor, we definitely, I mean, like last year, we definitely utilized the data. We want to continue that and make sure that it is being used and it's meaningful. The other thing that we didn't talk about here, but one thing that also happens is that each unit within SSW also gets its own data because we collect that information as well, and it's sent out to the unit head and or director. And so I send that, and then but that's specific to like units, not necessarily the entire school. And then I send that, and then I meet with folks if they want to kind of talk it through and figure out what's happening within their specific unit. But I say that to say that I certainly think that something similar can happen as we think about like broader groups like students, for sure. So let's talk about what, like you just said, is 4 weeks. But I do think your point is well taken about how do we make this meaningful and actually use it. But again, stressing that there are ways that it is being used, and I think we should think about what that could look like for your area too, Taylor. So thank you for that point.
Dana?
So when students graduate, they have to go through mandatory financial aid counseling. Could we do an exit interview with somebody non-partial, either from the school, or it could be somebody completely like a community member or somebody not directly affiliated with the school who could ask some of these qualitative experiences? Because I agree with what Corey and Darren have said, but my concern is when you ask those questions, it's very stigmatizing. A lot of people would be very afraid to share for retaliation, financial power dynamics involving careers, internships, etc. So if you ask people at a time when they're more likely to disclose and have less on the line, I would argue that's probably never going to happen for faculty and staff because employment is ongoing, so that's a little bit trickier. But from the student perspective, you could ask them either as alumni 1 month out or as they're graduating, how was your experience here? I don't just want to hear about the financial and emotional turmoil of loans, tuition in school. I want to hear what your experience was like with DEI, because if you ask them closer to graduation, you're more likely to get an unbiased, honest response than when you ask them like during fields or during the school year.
And Najma, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think too that with some of the qualitative pieces, and I'm not involved in the data analysis of this at all, but I think I recall you all collect a lot of qualitative data as part of the Pulse survey and are also just very, very careful and intentional about only sharing very broad themes, because so many of those stories that do offer detail about microaggressions and specific intersectional identity experiences can also very easily be identifying. And I see that.
Yep, that is absolutely correct. I mean, we have pages and pages and pages. But a lot of it, again, as Samantha was saying, we really want to respect folks and their identities and keep this as, because what we said was that this was confidential, and so we want to make sure that we're keeping it that way. But we do have a lot of qualitative data that could be. And Corey, did you volunteer yourself to do something? Like,
Yeah,
or am I volunteering you?
No,
Sorry.
I would be happy. I mean, listen, you had a team of folks who also do qualitative research, so you might not need me, but if you all want me, I'm happy to help out with that too. Yes.
Yeah, I think there's just a lot of things there and a lot of opportunity. I mean, we're definitely like thinking about that and incorporating it, but we did get a lot of some of those things that Dana might be alluding to as well. But I also do think that Dana's suggestion is not a bad one, actually. And so that could be something as we think about next steps, trying to think about what that might look like. And I'm thinking about that even exit interviews for staff and faculty who have to do those when they're leaving as well. That could be meaningful. Dr. Aaron is saying there were 18 pages of qualitative responses and none of us are qualitative researchers. So the help would be welcome. So let's talk about that. Okay, so thank you, Darren. Darren is saying that at Pitt they had mandatory exit surveys that had, okay, so that's something. Got it, Darren. Thank you. All good thoughts that we are taking note of. And if you all see me not kind of like responding, I'm just like absorbing and processing. So thank you all. Are there any more comments, questions, concerns, or anything else? If not, you can feel free to send me an email. What I am going to do are two things. We're going to send out a PDF of this, but also we're going to be working on a report as we did last year. We also did a report. It was about a 4 to 5 page report last year that we put online. So we're going to be doing the same thing, but we feel as though having a presentation is equally as important as opposed to just putting the report online that maybe people will read or maybe not read. So we wanted to do this in addition to those other pieces as well. So again, please feel free to email us, to send us a message if you have any more specific questions, if you have any thoughts. We generated a lot of really good ideas today as well. So if you have any other ideas that you may think of, please let us know. We are going to continue doing this. So it will happen again at the end of the year. And actually, we are being used as a model for other schools, because now we have the School of Nursing and the graduate school who also want to use our surveys and implement a pulse survey. So I think that that is good, that we are sort of like setting the standard in terms of what this can and should look like, even though it's a continuing improvement process. So thank you once again to everybody, and thank you all for taking the time to fill out the survey, because we won't be able to do that without respondents. So Samantha and Stephanie, I think we're done with our particular portion. I don't know what else you all may have to add.
Thank you, Najma. Thank you once again for presenting that all to us. So before we close out, we wanted to leave space for if there are any announcements that anybody would like to present. Yes, Paul?
Yes, hi. Thanks everybody for giving me a second to talk about this. We have a research seminar with Trinette Clark-Goings. She used to work here. She's at University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and is doing some great work in the area of equity. And so I'm really going to encourage you to, now I'm having trouble finding the title of her presentation, encourage you to all come and have her give her a strong welcome back. It's substance use among adolescents and emerging adults of color, preventing health disparities. So just a reminder, like you know, Nejma can't do all the heavy lifting, so we all need to include equity work, and so the research office is also involved in this in whatever way possible. In fact, there's a training tomorrow on anti-racist language in science. So just some things to keep in mind.
Thank you, Paul. Anyone else?
I had a quick announcement, and it got really cold, so I'm inside now. So I'm wearing a mask. But I wanted to share, I'm going to put the flyer in the chat as I talk about it so people have a frame of reference. I represent DREAM along with Mary McKelvey and Libby Nuss, and QCA, Edgar Fields, Valentina, and Peter Ross and Jessica Leibowitz. The 6 of us are collaborating to offer the school's first ever lavender ceremony. A quick synopsis is a lavender ceremony is an LGBTQ+ graduation ceremony, and does a lot of allyship representation and presentation and honoring those with underrepresented identities in higher education. Although it specifically focuses on LGBTQ+, we're doing kind of an intersectional lens on it with disability. The event will be Friday, the 13th, because of course it's Friday the 13th. But it's 4 to 6 p.m. It says the School of Nursing lawn, but that might be changed to the auditorium because we have a lot of RSVPs. I'm going to put the link in the chat. Please sign up. You don't have to be in the LGBTQ+ spectrum. You can be an ally. You don't have to be part of the school. You can have guests, students, staff, faculty, but we really like to welcome. If you want to wear faculty or student regalia, awesome. If you just want to wear a t-shirt and pants, that's also fine. We're not going to enforce a dress code. It's choose your own outfit and choose your own adventure in terms of your dress, but we're really excited. There will be food, which is why we need you to RSVP so we know how much food we need. And we hope to see you there.
Thank you, Tina.
So I'm going to jump on the announcements bandwagon for just to announce the Daniel Thurs Social Justice event. So our spring social justice lecture is community perspectives on and responses to violence. And we've invited folks from 3 Baltimore-based community groups. We have Jakia Jones, who is an MSW graduate of ours, who's going to be talking she's working at Baltimore Ceasefire, Kelly Sparks from Sons of Phoenix, and Reverend Corey Barnes, who is with We Our Us, and it's going to be facilitated by Kyla Liggett Creel and Caroline Harmon Darrow. So we hope you'll join us. It is January 10th, so that's going to be a very packed week. I put a link in the chat if you'd like to register, and it's also, feel free to share with anyone. It's free, it's open to the public, it is virtual. It's May 10th from 5 to 6:30. If you continue, we're also doing with the Office of Continuing Professional Education. If people want CPE credits, there's a small charge for that, but for everybody else, it's free, and we welcome everybody. And yeah, please feel free to disseminate and share, and please come.
Thank you, Corey. Anyone else? Not. I also want to make sure to plug our unpacking I can never say that. I'm so sorry, but that is our panel. Our last panel for the semester, it's going to be on Friday, May 6th, from 12:45 to 1:45. So please join us if you can. And if there's no more announcements, anybody else? Last call. You can't hear me?
Yeah, I can't hear you.
I'm sorry, I was just speaking normally. You know how soft I am. But I was saying, last call. Let me yell a little bit. Okay, if not, I do want to make sure that you attend our last DEIC meeting of the semester, which is Monday, May 16th, same time, same place. So we hope to see you then.
Bye, everybody.